Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Property Marketing Lounge. The Lounge is a sub-brand of Property Marketing Strategists, and we've developed it to help share insight, support and collaboration and encourage networking across kind of the PBSA, student accommodation, co-living and build-to-rent sectors. So we're really pleased that we've got to episode 4. Thank you for everyone for still engaging and joining us and coming to these sessions. We really appreciate it. And please do continue to share and let people know about what we're doing within your network, because we want as many people as possible to kind of benefit from our panelists and speakers and the sessions that we're doing. Firstly, I just want to say a big thank you to StuRents for sponsoring this session. Thank you to Michael and his team. We couldn't continue to develop and innovate our products and services without the valued support of our sponsors. So thank you very much. Michael will be introducing and talking a little bit more about what StuRents do in a minute. Sarah and I are really on a mission to elevate marketing in property. In our experience, it's led us to believe that marketing is not always able to deliver the value that it possibly can within the sector. That's largely due to kind of lack of voice, influence and engagement across the whole business. So that's why we've set up this system to try and change that process within the sector. We've got a number of webinars coming up over the next few months, kind of pretty much got the whole year covered, with a range of experts, including Michelle Carville, who wrote Sustainable Marketing, Kate Owen from UPP, Ben Hall from Loft, and many more. So please do continue to sign up to our mailing list or drop us an email and we'll keep you updated with our next sessions. So back to today's session, and we're talking all about data. Many of you will probably know that at the back end of last year, Sarah and I did a survey on marketing in property. And one of the things that we found there was there's a bit of a grey area around data and its use in the sector and how it's used for marketers to make decisions. What we found was that 28% were most likely to use data to inform their decisions, but 34% said that they were least likely to use data at all. We found this quite worrying because analysing and reviewing data can bring a lot of benefit across your whole marketing strategy. But beyond that, I think the follow-on questions around that showed that there suggested wider problems around potentially a skills gap, but also around ownership and access of data for marketing teams. And simply, I guess, just not being aware of what was available, what was there and how we could utilise it. So we've got still loads of questions to ask. And we're joined by a brilliant panel today to kind of help us kind of unpick some of those questions and find out, you know, what is happening and what more can be made available to marketers. And I, for one, am looking forward to the discussion today. We do encourage you to ask questions. One of the great things about our sessions is that we do get great engagement from our attendees. So please, can you put any questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens? We will monitor the chat function, but I can't guarantee that we'll get those questions to our guests. So if you can use the Q&A, that would be great. And I will now pass you over to Sarah.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're delighted to be joined by experts in their field. We have Adrian Hudson from Property Data Insights. We have Carrie Scrivener-Leask from Dataloft, and Michael Rainsford, our very special sponsor from StuRents. So we're just going to go around the virtual sofa so that our guests can introduce themselves. So Carrie, do you want to go first?
Hi, yeah, I'm Carrie Scrivener-Leask. I'm a housing market economist at Dataloft, where I've been for 10 years. And prior to that, I was an associate director in the residential research team at Savills. So I've been analysing residential markets in the UK for over 2 decades. And increasingly, that's obviously the build-to-rent sector for us at Dataloft is one of our main areas now. But still doing work with housing developers and housing associations and local authorities.
Thanks, Carrie. Adrian?
Hello, I'm Adrian Hudson. I'm the Managing Director of Property Data Insights. I've been involved with data for about 30 years, 10 years at Rightmove, setting up the data services division there, and then post there on new build, working with surveyors, lenders, and everyone in between. Thanks.
Thank you. Michael, would you like to introduce what you do with StuRents and a bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, thank you, Sarah and Deanie, for having me, and good afternoon all. It's good to be here. So I'm Michael, one of the founders and directors of StuRents. StuRents was founded in 2008, and we are a leading search platform for student housing with more than 700,000 HMO and PBSA beds listed on the platform. We also have a leading property management system providing an end-to-end tenancy management engine for operators to manage the entire rental journey. Putting these two core business units together, we have a large data insights and research platform. We provide research and insights in 46 UK and Ireland towns and cities, and as a result work with most and many of the industry's key operators, lenders, investors and developers on getting the data to understand and operate in the student space.
Great, thank you very much. Building on that, I'd be really keen to find out a little bit more about your careers, because data isn't a subject on its own. It's probably not something that you grew up thinking that was going to be your career, or maybe I'm wrong. So Michael, do you want to go first? How did kind of this part of kind of the data analytics become part of your career?
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that as a founder of StuRents, I've done almost every job within the business at some point, but today gravitate mostly towards either supporting key accounts as well as the overall direction of our core products. As a result of that, I think data is fundamental to everything we do at StuRents. We work with over 70% of the entire student market in the UK. And customers increasingly, for various reasons, rely on our insights to operate. As markets get more competitive, that's increasingly the case. And whether that's for pricing of operational assets or to spot development acquisition opportunities, we are there and the clients are asking questions. So I think in terms of data plays a day-to-day role in what we do, because when we onboard customers into our property management system, I think they're generally surprised by the extent of our knowledge and data we can bring to their business. We are a PMS with a view on the market, and we can do that because we have a marketing and PMS system where most PMS providers don't understand acquisition or don't have a part of their business that fills beds. So as a result of that, we almost sort of crave and demand customers to hold us to account and help us drive the product forward. So pretty much data is there and involved in in every part of our core business.
Thank you. Adrian, we worked together many years ago, obviously, but I never really found out how you got there. What drove you to a career analysing data?
Well, thanks. Yeah. So for my sins, when I left university with a mountain of debt, I walked around the recruitment consultants looking for a job. And then one of the recruitment consultants said to me, "Hey, have you ever thought about being a recruitment consultant?" So that's why I started with for my sins. So please forgive me. Yeah. But I like to think, one of the good guys who we were typically burning out people in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. You're longer than there for 3 months, you were doing well. And data came into it quite early, because fundamentally I made the link between understanding the data behind driving decisions in recruitment, and also the leveraging of tech and data in terms of things like CV analysis, etc. Yeah, to make commercial benefit. Yeah, to make my job better. And that's been a theme throughout, actually, which is that this kind of goes to Michael's point as well that he was making there, that there is a link between data and the commercial aspects, but data by itself doesn't do anything. You need insight, hence the company name, and that's kind of where that's driven me through my career now, which is effectively taking or accessing large amounts of data, yeah, and looking at it and going, can we draw a link between the information we've got here, other information we might to seek out, yeah, to actually derive commercial decision making and the bottom line. So that's where I've come from.
Absolutely. And Carrie, have you had a similar career path or completely different?
Well, so obviously I started as a graduate in Savills research team, but the problem was back then is that there wasn't really much data around in the residential market. So their vision back then was to start building their own data sets, and that started with paper deal books. So they would collect information on buyers, sellers, landlords, tenants, and literally it was handwritten alongside the price in their books. And so as a graduate, your first job was to basically put all that into Excel. Obviously things have moved on, and while I was there, that information was still really important to their business, but they intertwined it with their CRM, so agents couldn't complete on deals until they'd also entered all the profile data of the people they were dealing with. So that was one thing. And then another key data set that they started with was their indices for the prime markets that they're working in. So they would spend a lot of time, collating baskets of properties that they would then form their prime indices across the country. And then I suppose the other key thing I do there, as well as building up sort of planning data and strategic sites data, was that they would use sales data for strategic decisions for their board, like whether they would open and close offices. So that's kind of how I started with data, and things have moved on a lot in my career, and now there's obviously much more available that can be done in much quicker time. So yeah.
And in the organisations you've worked in, where has data sat? I know personally that I've worked in organisations and there's not a data department. Is it part of finance, part of operations, part of marketing? Where do you feel you sit?
Shall I answer that one?
Yeah.
Well, so I've always been, my role is a researcher with data. So we've tended to use the data and then work with planning teams or development consultancy teams or even other research departments in other organisations. But the data might be theirs, but they wouldn't know what to do with it and would send it to us to look at it and then send it back with the insight. So for us, it might come from finance departments, it might come from planning departments or development departments, but it would come to research to kind of collate it all and then send it back in a different format that they could use.
How about you, Adrian?
I was about to say it's really interesting, Carrie, in that I didn't know you were from Savills because we did a lot of work with Savills.
No, I'm not anymore. I work for Dataloft now. That was initially.
Yeah, I mean, the point you were making there, which is I thought was really interesting, was and this is what I've seen in a lot of organisations, is they know they have a lot of data, but they don't really know what to do with it. So it gets sent around to different places. So who owns the data? There doesn't appear to be, as Sarah said, a central owner of data. There are different departments who go, well, this is, we try and draw something out of this, but how do we draw it out of this? So Savills is obviously quite research focused and has research teams and that, but that's probably in many instances an unusual situation to have, and it usually gets, I've seen it where it's been gone to an office junior to try and say, can you pick out something from this, all the way to going out to consultancies and saying we've got this data pool of stuff. And
I mean, at Dataloft now, obviously we're a consultancy, so we, people come to us with their data and we will help them get the insights that they need. And obviously we also have our PropTech product that automates housing market analysis for people who don't have their own research teams. So yeah,
seems like the word research is key, really. And I wonder, I'd be interested to hear from kind of the audience as to how many people in their organisations are actually involved in or responsible for research, really, because it's clearly a key part of driving the business forward. And if they use external companies as yourselves, I mean, who should own it? Who should own research or data in your opinion? Is it one person's responsibility or one department's responsibility or everyone's?
I think I can take this one. I think, from our perspective, to us, the research division is very much a core part of a business that benefits from sitting between our marketing and property management platform. I think that to some extent, we work with a large number of the industry's key operators, and what we see is not a great deal of consistency in how organizations deal with data. Everybody knows data is valuable, but at the same time, you can collect an infinite amount of data. Then, as Adrian said, it's what you do with it and what's actionable off the back of that. I think in terms of, if I pivot that to our customers and who we believe should own the data, I think to some extent, there's certainly merit in having a centralized team or individual that takes charge of what that business intelligence framework looks like. If you have data, where does it go and who can see it? I guess a live example in our industry is that the industry isn't short of high fidelity data. It's all about the fidelity of that data. You can have bad data and make bad decisions. And from our perspective, there's always an argument that marketing or ops or finance or somebody else could take the lead on a particular data project or need. However, what is quite consistent is, there's only a certain number of hours in the day, and it's quite often the case that as with most businesses, that data isn't being used harmoniously and coherently across the business. And we see that in particular in the student space. You can see assets come to market which don't have product market fit, that are 50 to maybe 100% above the prevailing market average price in the city that they operate in. And you question how that can come about. How can an asset come to market that doesn't have that fit and is priced at a level which might not be economically viable 3 to 5 years out? And I think that's because every year that goes by, the market gets more competitive. And 10 years ago, certain cities, it was very easy to operate student accommodation. Now it's much harder because markets are either very tight or oversupplied. And I think that's dragged in all departments. Marketers want to know if they're uncompetitive, to what extent. Operations need to know what incentives they need to provide to drive sales, or what time of year to go out with promotions and offers to groups of domestic or international students. And finance need to understand cost of sale, but it's a huge task. And I think that the real challenge is only using the amount of data that you need, good quality data, and making sure that the entire organization is as sort of in tune with that as possible, because it's very easy and understandable that that everybody is using data in different ways. And I think now, with the launch of tools, the ease of using tools like Power BI or Tableau or similar, everybody can do it. It's what you do with that data that I think is the most challenging thing. What insights have been derived and how do you act on it? And I think that's the biggest challenge.
So, yeah, I was going to say, so Michael, on that one, I've noticed some things to organisations as well, but so I'll pose this to you as a question, really. Both yourself and Carrie have said there about, used across the organisation, and one of the things I've picked up there is different departments needing different things from it. Yeah, but the language of data sometimes gets in the way. Yeah. So how do you communicate the relevant piece of information at the relevant time to the right audience and pick that out as marketeers across an organisation?
I think that's a really good question, Adrian. I think it's that difference, isn't it, between having a completely open-ended approach to data analytics versus more formalized metrics and analytics. And I think there's been a lot discussed on the skill sets of marketers with things like Google Analytics, Google Ads, social metrics, and they become very safe spaces, because what they do is create very tangible, commoditized metrics that can be allegedly compared across platforms. Delving deeper, they often can't, but I think it's about reducing data points and statistics to something recognizable, a cost per acquisition or a cost per goal completion, whatever that may be. And we battle with that every single day, because we would love the market to understand their average cost of filling a bed, but the reality is that does get quite complex when you're combining direct cost of sale with marketing budgets and rebookers and everything in between, and we're being challenged every day with that. And I think that is the issue, that the incentives of a marketer or operator or finance team member to utilize the same data and come to the same conclusions is very difficult. Everybody's solving for their needs. So whilst we strive for consistency, the reality is that you can tell any story you want with data. And for us, that where we draw the line is, we like working with our customers to create standardized dashboards, performance dashboards, that are very easy to understand, because otherwise you're buried in huge amounts of data and you're putting all of that burden on the customer to understand it. So we do feel we have a role to play in delivering data insights to our customers, whether that's operational, marketing, or finance, that that is actually understood across the board. But it's a very difficult task. I agree.
Yeah,
How much of your, sorry, Carrie, you go.
I was just going to say, we've Dataloft Inform, which is our prop tech product. It's a similar thing where rather than having a bunch of data geeks behind it, it's lots of people like myself who've been working in the property industry for a long time, who know what the insights are likely to be. And so it's then delivering that in a way that estate agents, in this case, mainly, are able to look at infographics and charts and have the key insights pulled out for them for their local patches, rather than, you know, just sending them back with a load of charts and tables that they don't really know what to do with. So that can then be used by their marketing department. There's infographics on there that they can, you know, easily insert into marketing material, with, you know, with the experience of analysts behind it who, you know more than just the numbers, but understand the market as well.
I mean, thanks for sort of bringing it back to marketing. That's kind of where I was going next with it, as we are predominantly a marketing kind of organization. What are your experiences of data being utilized by marketing departments, Michael? I mean, we've worked together. I'm in marketing, but generally across the board, how much is demanded of you by marketeers?
I think the answer to that is a lot, and increasingly so. And, you know, we absolutely want to be in that position. You know, we crave it because, you know, fundamentally the product gets better when we are challenged with things that we can't answer today, but, you know, we have a solution for in the future. Then that should hopefully always be the case. You know, it should always be something you can't do. There's always a new feature or product that you can bring in to help the customers. But I think from a marketer standpoint, and in particular StuRents, what we see every day is customers that fundamentally want to know how their assets are positioned in their cities. Every single city is different. We list the majority of accommodation in every student city. And if an operator is in 10 cities, every single one of those cities is going to be different. Affordability will be different. The seasonality of when students search will be different. The product market fit will absolutely be different, even if the two cities are 10 miles apart. And that's what we specialize in. And as standard, customers get access to quarterly reports on StuRents, but they can also engage in bespoke data requests. We're about to launch a data platform so customers can log in, subscribe at the city level, and consume pricing and fundamental market data in the student sector. That'll be launching in the coming months. But day to day, marketers are keen to understand outperformance and underperformance. You know, it's the typical issue is, you know, can we get more leads? And it often comes down to some simple things, price, and how you position that product. And I think COVID's been a massive eye opener for that, because you know, there are some operators that have relied 100% on international agent-based bookings, and when that market dries up, has no strategy to attract domestic groups. Now, the problem with domestic groups versus international is you could easily take a 40% budget cut between those two segments of demand. So, you know, you've only got to look at today's data. Take Sheffield, a very challenging city to operate in. There's still quite a sizable supply pipeline, despite the fact that many new assets have come to market. You know, Sheffield, the average budget in Sheffield we determined to be about £119 per person per week. New schemes that came to market in 2021 have an average price of £164 per person per week. So almost a 40% premium. And that's basically where our conversations start. If we can't move price, what else can we do? And then it goes down to, are you attracting groups? If you've got clusters, are you attracting 4-bed, 5-bed, 6-bed? Because everybody in the city wants 4 beds. So there are conversations. And typically we want to see flexibility on price and flexibility on promotions at certain times of year. The reality is often quite different. Marketers in our space sometimes are quite limited to some extent in what they can do on a pricing basis, because, you know, fundamentally moving rents is a hard thing to do, which we all know. And then it's about timing and promos, and we get absolutely stuck in that. We feel like we've got a role to play. It's impossible not to have a view and have those conversations with customers. So that's exactly where we want to be. But the market is exceptionally challenging at the moment, and I think it will continue to be so, because the fundamentals are getting tighter. It really isn't easy to operate in this space now like it was, 7 or 8 years ago in some of the severely undersupplied cities. It's a very different market now.
Absolutely. Adrian, in your organisations that you've worked in, what kind of relationship have you had with marketing? Is the data that you've been responsible for been something that marketeers have asked for or had access to?
No, we haven't had much of a relationship, and this is one of the reasons why this is an interesting forum to discuss this type of thing, really, because there are pockets where, you're seeing people coming to you and asking for specific stuff, but in terms of the marketing in the round, my experience has been that the conversations between the data geeks, the data analysts, and the researchers and the marketeers have been limited. Yeah, and it's been basically on the basis of a particular request for a specific piece of information, and there's been not much sort of discussion or discourse around how we can use this to move the business forward, or to move the marketing strategy forward, or to move the conversation forward. So does that answer the first part of the question? Was there a follow-up on it? Or?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very interesting, and I guess I'm not surprised, knowing the places that you've worked, and wonder as time goes forward if that would change with kind of maybe the focus on B2B marketing, for example. There's plenty of organizations that, whilst they might not have a product, maybe they have a service and can use data to get that message across. Carrie, that's probably quite a lot of your customers.
Yeah, so obviously we do B2B, but we do, there's quite a flow of work that comes our way that is for a marketing department of a developer, and they want to do a glossy not brochure, but like a research insight into a specific scheme and try and encourage people to buy. That's one flow of work. But quite interestingly, which is more relevant to the audience here, is we've got a data set we call Dreamer, which is Dataloft rental market analytics, and it has 5 million references and 3 million tenancies in there. And for Greystar recently, for their marketing department, they were taking a different tactic where they wanted to decide where to put physical advertising for their scheme. So rather than trying to segment their consumers through lifestyle and target different social media, they were going back to physical advertising. And to do that, we used our data on tenants to look at the potential reach of their market. So where tenants living in a local area moved from originally, number one, where tenants in that area work, also where tenants who previously lived in that area have moved to, and then where tenants in that catchment area, there's another one, where tenants in that catchment area who work there, where they live. So it's building on something that the strategic housing market assessment model does. You don't just look at a local authority or borough, you kind of get a bigger spread. And so from that, they're able to map all that and see, right, we need to put our adverts in these tube stations.
Carrie,
that's really interesting.
It's interesting, Carrie, that you mentioned that. We get a lot of that in student, actually. Obviously, Greystar operate in the student space. The interesting thing there is that the purpose-built segment in the student space wants to find out exactly that. Where do students live, and where are their campuses, and where are they having their lectures? And obviously that's more the case pre-COVID and post-COVID, given most people are at home right now. But we've done that many times, and it's getting your hands on those HMO data sets is the challenge. Plotting purpose-built assets and how big they are is easy. It's pretty commoditized. There's 1,500 buildings max in the private space, and it's like plotting hotels. But the HMO space is close to 1 million students dotted about across the city, and we do exactly that. But it almost misses the bigger picture sometimes in the student space, because to do that, you're saying we can attract domestic students into purpose built, if that's the goal. Not suggesting that was the goal of your study, but we've had that multiple times. and it kind of misses the point that in our space, there's almost two types of supply with quite limited substitutability. Getting HMO students into PBSA requires a conversation on budget, being attractive to groups. And so, we find that stuff fascinating. Where do students live, and where could they move to, and how do you make that happen? And, the most exciting thing for us this year is exactly that: purpose-built operators having a willingness to go after the HMO market where before it wasn't needed. Filling properties with international students, you could just keep doing that. And then when that dried up, the acknowledgement that you had to be better hedged than having one distribution route for filling beds. So if you do get more of that and want to work together, then
well, yeah, I think we do have some student. We are able to identify some student through the tenants referencing data, but I don't know how big the samples are, and they might be better in some places than others. But it's certainly something we can talk to you about.
Yeah, perfect.
That example was fascinating, Carrie, and it showed the power of using data to make those decisions, because the cost of outdoor advertising is huge, and how easy would it be to make a mistake and not be in the right places and not see any return. I'm just going to pause for a second because I can see we've had some audience questions. Deanie, is there anything that you'd like to ask our panelists?
Yeah, we've had a few questions come in. So first we've got Miranda Lamb, who's asked about whether you buy data from data providers, and do you sell your data, and are you able to deliver the data via an API?
Well, for me, I know that we do sell our data and we are able to provide it by API, but that's for the Dataloft Inform product, which is housed in market analytics. For Dreamer, I think some of the rental is on there, and yeah, it depends which element it was, but yeah.
So it sounds like, Miranda, you need to get in touch with Dataloft, and I don't know if anyone else as well, probably some of our other guests. Another question we've got about someone who works in PBSA and they do use StuRents. It's important to use data, but what are the most materials that Michael can recommend to property owners and operators to collect for making marketing decisions? So, for example, source of leads.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, something that we're working on. The two sort of core data sets for us that we interact with is operational data. So essentially where the students, where the prospective tenants coming from, who's booking from where, what are their rents, how you utilize the assets. And then the other side is the more fundamental supply demand pricing data that goes into where operators go to market and how they sell. I think from our standpoint, the most important data, so an initiative we're working on at the moment is we have a product called StuRents Channel Manager. And it's important to mention because the channel manager feeds out data to around 25 third-party channels. So that's our sort of product that collaborates with a whole host of third-party services that can generate bookings on behalf of operators. And we provide APIs that live feed that data, listing data, to those parties. Something that we're about to launch is via the inbound booking into our PMS to automatically attribute source of booking, source of lead to those third-party channels or customer websites. It's an minefield in terms of attribution. You go on Google Ads and it makes it sound easy, but the reality is there's a lot of assumptions in the background and a lot of things you need to do to get a real picture. This is just the starting point for us. And fundamentally what we say is that, specifically in the purpose-built space where there's a need to be in as many places as possible, we encourage our customers to work with as many of those platforms as possible. Automating it obviously makes the cost of working with 20 instead of 10 more trivial than it otherwise would be. But I think in terms of, if you're an operator and you're looking at what, data points are most important, I think, understanding that cost per booking, having a go at understanding, what is our blended cost per booking, because that's where the conversation eventually gets to. If you're paying £1,500 on Google PPC to fill a bed, but not willing to pay an agent or to pay a marketing listing site, a fraction of that, make sense of that, because filling a 300 bed development requires probably 50 booking sources, not 2, and that's increasingly where the market is going.
And I think that's one of the key points, is it's about the kind of, for marketeers, it's about the why. If you're doing something, what's the value of that and what's it achieving you? And if you're not looking at that, then you're looking at the wrong things. And we've got one more question, which I think you might have answered, so I didn't know whether you had anything more to add in it about kind of, again from Miranda, about finding that HMO data is hard to attain, and kind of asking kind of where you guys, whether you guys scrape websites to locate how many HMO properties are in circulation in a particular city and whether or not it's rented out to students or professionals. I think you've probably answered this, but I didn't know if you had anything more to add around that question.
No, I think it's a quick one. We don't scrape, but we list 500,000 beds of it. So the lion's share in many cities. So we very much rely on our data to build a picture on the HMO market. So very welcome to to challenge us on that and see what we can provide. But it's very much what we list. In some cities that's close to 100%. In others it's it's half of the market. But it's very much there. And it's easy to forget for the PBSA operators that it's 75% of the market pretty much. That you can do an analysis of PBSA, but if you ignore 3 out of 4 beds, which is HMO, it's you're missing a big segment of the market.
Yeah, and I think we also, as part of the tenants referencing part of our Dreamer data set, are able to identify sharers as well. So and with so for each reference, there is then all the profile of that data. So you have their income, you have where they work, what they're paying for their rent. So you can there's lots of really interesting analysis that you can do, like proportion of income spent on rent, for example. Number of beds in the property.
That's great, thank you. I think that's it, Sarah. So
one bit of data that we haven't really touched on is customer feedback. So when we surveyed our respondents in our survey, it was cited that it's important to use data to inform decisions, but conversely the respondents also said that their companies are not gaining customer feedback to inform the product or decisions. So why do you think this is, and where does customer feedback sit regarding data? Any of you, would you like to take that one?
I'll have a go. I've got two angles actually. With one, with our Dataloft Inform product, we ask for feedback from our subscribers all the time about, are we producing the right kind of analytics that are useful to you? Are the infographics any good? What would you like to see more of, less of it? And we then put that into our product development plan, and it's kind of evolving. The product evolves all the time to meet their needs. There's that thing. And then also for some of our clients, so we've recently done a big survey for a housing association who's also a developer, and they were after customer feedback as a result of how buyers' priorities have changed as a result of the pandemic. Because obviously, as Mike was saying before, if your market is strong and you know what you're doing, it's fine. But if something suddenly changes, like with Michael's, the overseas students stop coming, they just need to know how to adapt their product. But if you're a developer, it's quite a long lead time between application and completion. So they're starting to ask what has changed, what are your priorities now? Is it still location? Do you want a balcony or garden, and things like that? So that's how they were doing it, through primary research.
I think as well from our perspective, in the student space, for those operators that want to gather that feedback and do something with it, you could be talking about 100 tenants or 20,000 tenants. And I think, critical to that scale is the technology has to play a role. We're really only at the starting phase of that. We have tenant apps, which, tenants use to report maintenance, communicate with their property managers. But one thing that isn't quite formalized, which should be and will be with time, is the ability to ask questions and receive structured data back that can then be analyzed. And I think what our incentive with this is to make sure that operators can ask questions and provide the tenants with an incentive. I think fundamentally you have to look at what's the tenant's incentive to provide a good quality response. Are they just responding because they want to get rid of the notification on the app, or is there a reason why? And I think if you're asking questions to fine-tune the experience in student, some of the more exciting things being done are what events would you like to see? And if tenants give feedback and they see those changes, they're going to be naturally incentivized to keep providing good quality feedback. But I think technology is key to that. We could do a lot more and will do a lot more, but it comes down to it comes down to that incentives and asking the right questions. And I think in the student space, it is about experience, product offering, and maybe there's some commercial value that could be passed on to the tenants for that data. It's valuable data, and maybe one of those incentives is a discount on rebooking or whatever that may be. I think you can be creative as to how you gather it, but the alternative is too expensive. How else do you gather that data in volume as one of the, as a large national operator? But I think operators are doing more. I think it's important to show that you can change the product with customer feedback, and obviously that would have been a bit quiet during COVID, but we expect as students come back to campus that will play a bigger role.
Have you ever been involved with any work for either yourselves or clients where you've collated data, you've analysed it, and it perhaps hasn't been the outcome that you suspect your client organisation wanted? Could that be a reason for the hesitancy of actually acquiring data and analysing it, is that maybe they don't really want to know the answer? And as we've just been discussing, once you've got the answer and potentially you've paid a lot of money for that answer, you've got a little bit of responsibility to actually act on it. Adrian, you're smiling. Have you got an example of this?
This is something linked to the conversation, and so but before I answer that, because I have a slightly different perspective on this. Not being a marketer, but appreciate the importance of marketing, but being commercial and data driven. Can I ask Michael and Carrie first to answer your question, and I'll put my other spin on it? Yeah, around that.
Yeah, go ahead.
Carrie, Michael, have you?
Well, I can answer. I mean, yes, quite often that does happen. And then it depends on what they're using it for. So if you're informing, if your research is to the company themselves, so to the business, then it's up to them to take that on board and choose to do what they want, I suppose. But if it's for a marketing purpose, then obviously they're not going to always want to tell the truth, or will just pick the stats that they want to show. I mean, that's my experience of it. About you, Michael?
I think maybe it's a bit self-selecting, because we have conversations with the customers that find the right answers and they want to delve deeper and get more. But I think the reality of it is that when we look at data, we're not there to give an opinion as such. We're providing raw data and delivering it in a way that customers can interpret, and we're there to help interpret and make sure that data is understood, but the data is what it is. I think fundamentally, we feel part of our responsibility in the market in nature of trying to build transparency and more efficient operations is some of the realities are quite brutal. All the cities are different, and some cities are quite a struggle now and will be more so going forward. I think if we can play our part in exposing, for example, how out of budget certain assets are in certain cities, or how expensive it is to fill a bed, all we think that will do in time is rebase the market, and eventually you get to where you believe you should be today, but nothing happens first. So we're not really scared of delivering data that doesn't tell the story. I think in the student market at the moment, that's probably the case in 80% of the time, because it's a challenging market where data is needed to make good decisions, and the cost of bad decisions is huge. But I would completely agree with those points that I'm sure that in more than half of the time the data generates an outcome that isn't ideal, but it doesn't devalue that data at all, does it? You need to know that. You need to have that in hand to understand.
That's really interesting, and I agree entirely with what you said there, Karen, with Michael as well. But this links that conversation around the communication between data, research, possibly the broad level about making decisions, etc. And the reason I was smiling when Sarah brought that question up actually was around an example I've seen in the past where people are saying, I'm less student focused and more resi and let. But I've seen people ask for data around actually, transactions on properties, how many properties transact, etc. And you look at it, and you look at the information about marketing, and you look at listing, and how many transact, and the data doesn't tell the story that people expect it to tell. But then that conversation just stopped. It required people then to push them and talk to the marketing team, talk to the data teams to discuss them together. Say, right, so the data doesn't tell us what we thought we would say. thought it would tell us. But what's it telling us about the other stuff? What about the absence of data? So the simple example of this one here is okay, so a listing's put on, and there's a need or want for that person to move house. They might need to because they need space because of a new addition to a family, etc., or they might want to because they're aspirational and wants to do X and Y. But that conversation then between the research team and the designers, if it stops simply as we have this premise, can you prove it? And you go no, well, the data's the data. It is what it is. But what about the other stuff? Why didn't it transact yet? And is there an imperative behind there? And then actually, if it's a want, do they then put a BMW on the driveway because they can't sell their property or they can't let their property in that? So bringing that conversation in the round where you're talking around the marketeers and the data providers saying, right, everything that goes slightly wrong is an opportunity in another place. And I've seen repeatedly people end the conversation without thinking through the impact on marketing, the impact on research, and asking the follow-up questions. And that's why I was sort of sitting there smiling, going, I've experienced this, and it would have been great sometimes if, the marketeers had the ability is the wrong word. Sometimes being given the right to push forward additional stuff. You often see marketing and research and data teams put to one side and not seen as part of the overall conversation. And that conversation doesn't always go in one direction, but it leads in other interesting directions.
So I guess what you're trying to say maybe is it actually about the skill of communicating the results as well? So you might have the results you either wanted or didn't want, but marketeers have got to be able to communicate that back to the stakeholders, back to the board, to incite change, really. And maybe quite often marketeers, and I'm speaking from experience, know the outcome that they want, but then don't necessarily know how to put that across and how to communicate that, especially if it's not what the company had been driving to achieve.
I think you might be right there, Sarah. And, there is certainly a communication piece where marketeers talk about certain metrics and talk certain language, and data people talk about certain metrics and certain language. And where there is and boards and finance departments talking certain language as well. And sometimes it's hard to understand the underlying reasons and to communicate those. And I think that as data plays more of a key role in some of the decisions around marketing and some of the decisions around board level, there has to be a kind of meeting of minds where we try and talk each other's language and educate each other, say, well, actually, this is important. And it's important because it affects you for your need case and your language and your way. But perhaps you should talk my language as well.
Yeah. And I guess what we're talking about, decisions being made, it comes back to money, it comes back to return on investment, it comes back to the commercial side of things, which is how a marketeer should be able to use this information to get change to happen, really. Like you said, it's about the language thing. And I think marketeers should be very comfortable in talking about Google Analytics and social media metrics as part of their day-to-day jobs, but don't necessarily tie that back to the finance, the return on investment, the why, really. Carrie, what's your experience with kind of that communication and language, I guess, between different stakeholders?
Yeah, it's definitely what makes a good researcher, I guess, is taking the data and the insights and communicating it in a way that everyone understands, and what it means for essentially for our clients. I think sometimes you can get very techie reports that people wouldn't know what that meant. So it really is about understanding what questions they wanted to find out and making sure that it's delivered in a way that they can understand. And quite often that might be a lot of clients really like maps because they're visual, something that's a bit more visual than just charts, complicated charts, or it's and these days with there's lots of animated charts you can do. I think using Flourish, or there's lots of skills that GIS people have, it's moved on a lot since I did at university. So visualizing the data is often the best way, and keeping the text to a minimum, really, and just pulling out the key insights. But yeah, it's quite a skill.
I think, Carrie,
like I was just saying, you deal with lots of different stakeholders in all different levels. So yeah, how do you adapt to, you know, who's asking you for the data, really?
Yeah, I think I was going to agree with your point there, Carrie, that everybody understands data in different ways. And I think the skill is being able to deliver that in a way that whoever you're speaking to has, you know, has a way to understand it, whether that's visual or otherwise. I think for, you know, from our perspective, to add to Adrian's point to some extent, where the marketer has to be empowered to be able to make decisions. And so, you know, if there's something that can be acted on, do they actually have the ability to go ahead and do the thing that the data, their analysis is telling them? So that's obviously critical. I think from our perspective, making sure the market knows the data is there is goal one, because if you lead with the assumption that that data isn't available, or there's no high fidelity data, you can get away with not doing the level of due diligence and analysis. If you front it with this data is there and you should be using it, I think that changes the game completely. And you know, what we'd like to see going forward is fewer assets come to market that don't have fit, that are incorrectly priced, and in the wrong location. You know, all of those things, and then, you know, marketers are expected to fill those assets economically. That's a big challenge, because sometimes every single decision is already made before the product comes to market. And what we're increasingly seeing, which is really encouraging, is acquisitions being mindful of how attractive the assets are to operate and market. And they are very different things. An asset could be really viable on a spreadsheet, but a seasoned operator knows why they may not want to operate the asset. And same for marketers. You know, if you're used to fitting a bed at X and this asset's going to cost you 5 times that, it's naturally very unattractive because your options are limited. And, you know, we deal and get involved with that day to day, and everybody has their own bias that they bring to that conversation. They have their own problem to solve. But for us, goal one is, in the student space at least, the data is there, come and get it. Because you know, coming to market with assets that don't fit that local market, I think is inexcusable. It doesn't need to be that way.
So Michael, do people come to you at sort of the planning stage? So
Yes.
Almost when they're trying to work out the viability of their scheme and know what they're going to, what prices they're going to put on the units, they come to you then, do they?
Yeah, absolutely. So in planning application all the way up to asset acquisition, where, you know, there's a certain budget and there are a range of cities, and it's usually that top-down approach. Which cities do we want exposure to and why? Which assets are available in that city? And you know, one of the main challenges is all assets aren't available at all times. So it's not a perfect market. But what you can do at the very least is have a list of investment opportunities that meet your criteria. And everybody has a slightly different mandate. So a good asset for one might not be a good asset for the next. But, you know, that doesn't mean that one isn't viable. It just means that, you know, should that asset be operated in this way, and how does that go to market? And we don't have all the data, we just have part of that data. And, you know, our customers tend to come to StuRents and perhaps 2 or 3 other parties, but, you know, we're just a piece of that puzzle to help determine, is this city attractive? And a question, you know, that comes up a lot is, what will it look like in 3 years? Well, you have the supply pipeline, and we know what the market looks like today. So, you know, those 2 data points put together, you know, offer a good indication. Universities in our space disclose their demand growth figures and what their targets are, and you can take a view on whether they're achievable or not. So it's relatively easy with the data to build a supply and demand model that is significantly better than nothing. And you should be doing that at the acquisition or planning phase, not when the asset went live 2 months ago and there's no rooms that are filled. You know, it should be coming 3 years earlier, not once you have an operational asset that's not succeeding for whatever reason it may be.
Yeah, so it's similar to what we do for build to rent. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Deanie, have we got any other questions to ask our panelists?
We have, whether we can answer them quickly or not, I don't know, but I guess we can do a brief answer and then put them out via social afterwards. So we've got one from Lee Rennie from Milu. About most businesses will have Google Analytics installed on their website, but do you find it's often neglected or underused? We have a number of clients that have it installed, but they haven't taken the time or had it suggested to them by their web marketing team to create and track goals and review the data on a regular basis. Is that something that you guys find, that people aren't really using the data that's available to them?
I think from our perspective, yes, it's definitely a mixed bag. There's some exceptionally well kitted out teams that we work with day in, day out that do a lot within analytics and their paid advertising networks. I think a lot more can be done, and it goes back to that point of Google Analytics or social platforms being a safe space. I think there's a risk that marketers can lean on nice looking dashboards and easy to access data and metrics to tell a story, but I think you can tell any story with that data. That makes things like physical advertising and things that you can't track in Google Analytics unattractive, because you can't as easily put a data point alongside it. But I think there's a lot that the industry could certainly do. We capture a lot of our data insights by understanding who's coming to the platform, what they're searching for, and if customers could do exactly the same on their own marketing websites, that would be a dream, because we're ready to pull that into platform. But the reality is that, you know, I think a lot more can be done.
Any other questions, Dini?
I've got one more about how utilizing data can help us to predict future trends. Something that I'm very kind of like keen about is kind of what we can use data for to kind of really prepare ourselves for the future.
In my experience, it can go very wrong. And I take this is where, you know, I'll bow to both Michael and his data platform and Carrie's data platform and Carrie's research has been here. But the examples of things like planning data, there are often very long lead times to certain things going forward. So the pitch today, if you're not monitoring stuff which may materially affect a market, someone building a great big block which might take 3 years, right now that market looks great. 3 years time, that look very different. In answering that question, I'd say you need to be very careful, and you need to try and pull in data assets, curate them, and then draw the insight from them. You know, the data is the data, but the data by itself doesn't do anything. You need to cast your eye over it.
There's something about kind of you know, a lot of people, when they access data, they go, oh, I've done that data, I've done that research, that's done, I'll put that away. But actually it should be a cyclical thing, that actually you need to be aware of what's coming up year on year on year in your local areas. And so doing it 3 years ago isn't going to give you the answer of what's going on today. So it's just making people aware that it's an ongoing process. It's not a one-stop shop.
I think on that as well, the macro picture is that forward supply and demand curve, and saying what's the worst case scenario if all of this supply comes in, or taking a view on how much of that will come in. But I think that shouldn't be at the expense of the more micro stuff, which is equally important. You could bring a 1,000 bed asset to the market, and if it's priced correctly in the right location with a good fit in terms of size of clusters and whatever that may be, that asset can still absolutely succeed in an oversupplied market, because there's not oversupply in every asset type. There's a macro oversupply, and that's, you know, the supply demand is a starting point of the conversation, but that doesn't mean to say that everything coming isn't a good opportunity. It's just more of a challenge if it's coming into the market and it's, you know, not the right price or not the right product. I think that's when you piecing those two together is quite concerning. But there's still a huge amount of opportunity out there, and I guess that's why we're busy, because it's amongst all of the challenges, you know, there's a huge opportunity as well.
I think we're going to have to start wrapping up. I think we could have carried on for a few more hours on this, to be fair. I think to summarize, I think what we've concluded is that there's a huge amount of data out there, whether it's within people's businesses or whether it's to be obtained from some experts like yourselves out with people's organizations. And, you know, marketeers need to delve a bit more and ask a few more questions, and not just stop at answers if it doesn't quite show the outcome that you want. It's you know, it's incredible, I guess, with technology, how much more is out there now. And if you want it, then you can really find it. I'm going to pass back to Deanie now to close the session.
Yep, so thank you ever so much to all our panelists and all our guests. That was a brilliant session. I know that I've learned a lot, and I'm pretty sure our audience has too. So thank you. If you haven't seen a copy of the survey, there is a link in the chat. So please go to our website and do that, because I think we talked about it a lot in this session. Our next webinar will be on sustainability, and we'll be back on July the 15th. It's sponsored by Loft, and we've got guest panelists from Ben Hall alongside Michelle Carville, Scotty Hudson and Ian Dodds. You can sign up right now on our website at propertymarketingstrategist.co.uk. There is a recording of this webinar, which we'll be making available in the next few days, so you can watch again if you want to, or share with your colleagues. And we really, another shout out, so we really believe this is quite valued to marketing teams. So if you can share it with your marketing teams, your junior marketeers, that would be great, because I think they'll get a lot of benefit from sessions like these. And just finally about us, we do offer a property marketing consultancy service, which is focused around improving strategy across the organisation in terms of marketing. So if you're thinking about making some changes or want to see improvement in your marketing performance, then please do give us a call and we can have a chat about how we might be able to help. And finally, just want to say a big thank you to everyone joining us, and especially to Carrie, Adrian and our sponsor Michael. Thanks for engaging in the session, and join us in the lounge, and please come back again. We'll hope to see you all soon, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.